Good morning, family. We are going to be in the book of Esther. Esther chapter 4, verse 13 starts and says this: Mordecai told the messenger to reply to Esther, "Don't think that you will escape the fate of all the Jews because you are in the king's palace. If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come to the Jewish people from another place, but you and your father's family will be destroyed. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." This is the word of the Lord. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for who you are. We thank you that we have an opportunity to open up your word and see what it means to be on mission. I pray here in this moment that you would strengthen me. Thank you for reminding me of my dependence in you. I pray, God, that I would feel that and see that today, that those who are here will see that and understand that as well, that you are a living God, that you're moving and you're active and you use us for your glory. I pray, God, here in this moment that you would open up our hearts and our minds to receive what your word has to say as we continue in this series. Let me decrease and, Father, you increase. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. In Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Family, you guys can be seated. Well, good morning to you all. First, I want to say thank you so much for the phone calls, the emails, the text messages that come in by my house and all the things while we were grieving my grandmother. Many of you guys know that she passed, and she lived a very long life. She would have been 89 this year, so that's awesome for her. She's with Jesus right now, which is super dope. But at the same time, grieving is difficult. I think for us, this is one that hit us hard. And so I got tissues up here because grief like randomly hits me in moments where I'm like talking and I like just start crying. So if I do that, you guys know why, okay? I got big bags under my eyes too. I know you guys see that. Yes, it's okay to laugh at it, Abby. I thought about asking Rachel for some that stuff to cover it, but she's white and I'm brown and it wouldn't have worked. So here we are, guys. Welcome. I'm glad to be back. So we kicked off this year introducing us all to this vision statement where we believe that the Lord is leading us to be a church where we're going to be a diverse family on mission to see the flourishing of the church, our city, and the world. And what's been so, really, in my opinion, so dope over the last couple weeks is, number one, nothing has gone according to plan, which is yet another reminder that the Lord is going to do the work, right? And he invites us to be a part of it. And as we spend the next 2 weeks actually talking about mission, my hope is that is what we're going to see, is that he's going to do the thing. Right? He's going to move, he's going to operate, he's going to save, he's going to transform, and he can do that with or without us. Right? That's the text that we just said, right? As Mordecai is talking to Esther, we're going to talk about that in just a second. She's like, he says to her, he's like, yo, the Jewish people are going to get saved. Like, it's going to happen. He could use you, or he doesn't have to. But he's gracious enough to use you still. And I hope that that's our reminder over the next 2 weeks as we spend some time looking at what it means to be on mission. Now, if you were here with us when we went through the series in Acts, I spent a significant time talking about what it means to be on mission, right? Being empowered by the Holy Spirit, understanding what it means to go. But these next 2 weeks aren't going to be anything like that, okay? We're going to spend some time talking about being on mission on purpose. That's what this week is. But then next week, we're going to talk about the urgency of the mission. And my hope is as we listen to these things that we can find ourselves in a spot where we're like, okay, here I am, Lord, use me, send me, I'll go. Okay, so that's my hope for us over the next few weeks, okay? Now, to talk about mission on purpose today, we're in the book of Esther. Now, if you grew up going to church, you hear that we're in Esther talking about mission, and you're like, the story of Esther has absolutely nothing to do with missions. It has absolutely nothing to do with going to people, right? And I'm here to tell you, you might be wrong, okay? Because as I was studying, I was like, dang, it actually is pretty dope. It's really cool to see how God uses certain circumstances to save individuals, okay? Now, what I'm going to do over the next couple minutes is summarize these chapters 1 through 3 in Esther, okay? Because it's a lot of chunk and a lot of text. I didn't want to read the entire thing. But to give you context, the story takes place in our modern day Iran, okay, around 483 BC. The Jewish people have been exiled from Israel, right? They're bouncing around in exile, and they find themselves under Persian rule, okay, under King Xerxes. Now, well, Esther chapter 1, King Xerxes, he gets super drunk, okay, like really, really drunk. And he's like, you know what, hey, I'm drunk, this is this party, I kind of want to show off my wife a little bit, right? His wife Vashti. And so essentially in chapter 1, verse 7, he calls for Vashti to come into the room, and it says to come into the room with her crown on her head so that all the drunken royalty guys could gaze on her beauty, is what the text says. Now, what we don't know is that essentially does he mean, hey, come in here unveiled, which being unveiled during this time was still very, shameful for her. Or it could mean that he literally wanted her to just come into the room fully naked with just her crown on, which is still very shameful. Either way, what we see and what we realize in this is that Vashti says no. She's like, I ain't about that life, fam, right? Which we hear that and we're like, yo, good for her. But this embarrasses the king in front of all of royalty, in front of all of his friends, right, all his buddies. And so what Xerxes does, he goes back into his bedroom and he's depressed and he sulks a little bit. And one of his wise men comes in and essentially says, King, bro, that's not okay. You can't let her shame you in front of other people. In fact, in Esther chapter 1, verse 18, he says this, before this day is over, the noble woman of Persia and Media who hear about the queen's act will say the same thing to all the king's officials, resulting in more contempt and fury. So what he says is like, yo, if your queen did that to you, our wives are going to do that to us. Stand up for us here. Don't put us to shame, okay? And so he listens and he's like, all right, so what does he do? Xerxes deposes Vashti, banishes her from the kingdom. So to find a new queen, essentially Xerxes holds his own version of The Bachelor, okay? And you have all these different women and all the nation kind of coming, right? Here's what it says in chapter 2, verse 2. The king's personal attendants suggested, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Why? Verse 4. Then the young woman who pleases the king will become queen instead of Vashti. This suggestion pleased the king, and he did accordingly. Well, this is when we are finally introduced to Esther, okay? Esther is this young Jewish orphan who essentially comes in, and really what we come to find out is literally the only thing that she had going for her was apparently she was extremely gorgeous. How do we know that? Chapter 2, verse 7, it says, the young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. Michael Jackson would probably call her a PYT, right? The Commodores would say, yo, she's a brick house, right? You get what I'm getting at here, right? She was amazing. Well, here's how the contest worked, okay, for full context here, okay? Essentially, you would enter into the king's presence, and reality is the king would try you out. He would try you out. You'd appear before the king. You would do maybe some type of talent that you had or whatever the case may be, kind of walk down the runway, show your stuff, and then the king would sleep with you that night. This is what was taking place. And so literally day after day after day, the king would meet a new woman and he would do this. And then it comes to Esther's turn. And what we see in chapter 2, verse 15, it says that she wins the contest hands down. The king loved her the best. And so this little Jewish refugee orphan girl becomes the queen of Persia. Now, I want to make sure you realize what just happened here, okay? Again, it's been 3 weeks since I've preached here, so I'm coming in hot, all right? I want you to understand what just took place here. If you grew up in church, you probably heard that Esther was an example for you to follow, yeah? Is my mic on? Yeah, okay. You see that oftentimes she's put out as this example to follow. Now, in some ways, she'll become that. But when she's introducing a story, you're like, I don't know. I don't know about this. Listen, let's be real. She enters a sex contest to get married to a pagan king. This was one of God's chosen people who operated in this way. Now, scholars debate whether or not Esther had any choice in the matter. We could have that conversation, right? Because that was the king, and the king was calling all the pretty women. So we can say she didn't necessarily have a choice in the matter. But one thing is clear. We see that she went along with it. And in order to win the contest, she concealed the fact that she was Jewish, which also meant that she was silent about who God was in her belief in who God was. We see that in chapter 2, verse 20. This is not how God's people were supposed to act. This story actually takes place right after Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you're not familiar with these guys, there was an edict during in Babylon where they said that you couldn't pray at all. And Daniel was like, I'll show you. And he would pray in front of his window 3 times a day so that everyone could see him. Why? Because he wanted to honor God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what happened with them? There was a trumpet that was blown throughout the nation, and they all had to bow down to this big old statue, right? Not those 3. There's like, nah, we serve the Lord. We're not doing that. And so we can say that Esther didn't have a choice, but the reality is if she was truly understanding who God was, she could have the same principles and stand on just like those 4 guys did. But that didn't happen. Let's move forward a little bit, okay? After she becomes queen, a guy named Haman, who is basically the prime minister of Persia, decides that the Jews are a problem in the country, and for that reason, if they get left unchecked, that they were going to take over the kingdom. So he comes up with this final solution to the Jewish problem there in the nation, and on this particular day, he says that, hey, we should just kill all the Jews there in the nation. So we basically have a prime minister who wants to kill people. So Haman, this guy, he presents this plan to Xerxes to exterminate all the Jews there. And Xerxes, who you begin to realize as you read, he's a really hands-off leader. he's like, okay, that makes sense to me. And it's like, does it really? How? Right? And he says, okay, go ahead and do it. Right? And so the plan is moving forward. Well, there's a Jew named Mordecai who works right outside of the palace who finds out about this plot from Haman, who he just so happens to be Esther's uncle. And when he hears about this plot, he sends a message to Esther and tells her, hey, you've got to do something about this. They're going to destroy us all. And Esther sends a message back to him saying, in chapter 4, verse 11, Uncle Mordecai, what can I do? Do you remember how Xerxes responds to women who disagree with him? Right? He already banished his first wife. What do you think he's going to do to me? Especially if I question his government decisions, right? He's going to have me killed. And Mordecai responds to her in verse 13 of chapter 4, and this is what the text that we just read earlier, right? Mordecai told the messenger to reply to Esther, don't think that you will escape the fate of all the Jews because you're in the king's palace. If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come to the Jewish people from another place, but you and your father's family will be destroyed. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. He's suggesting she go before the king and ultimately confront him. Persian law said that if anyone came before the king uninvited, that they could be killed, especially a woman coming to tell him, right? If a woman was coming to the king during this time and saying, hey, you're making a mistake, there would have been blood. But I want us to see here Mordecai's confidence, okay? That Mordecai believed that God would accomplish his purposes. Write this down here. God's sovereignty is not an excuse for inactivity. Knowing that God is going to move and operate and all these other things is not an excuse for us to not do anything. And that's what Mordecai is telling to Esther here. God's sovereignty is what empowers us to actually do bold, crazy, audacious things for him. And so we see this in the second part of verse 16. She says, I will go to the king, even if it's against the law. If I perish, I perish. Now, short version of the rest of the story is that God uses Esther's bravery to save Israel. The king changes his mind. Haman's plan, it backfires completely. He ends up being hanged on the gallows that he built, right? Boo for him. The Jews are saved. But shortly after this story, two guys named Nehemiah and Ezra would actually lead the Jews back to Israel. And after a few generations, another Jewish girl, a descendant of one of the people that Esther would go on to save, is visited by an angel and told that she's pregnant with the Messiah, the Son of God. That's my sermon for today. Just kidding. I still got a lot to say. Here is what I want us to see from all of that and what it means for us to be on mission, on purpose. You ready? First thing I want you to see today is this. God placed Esther in the palace as part of his plan. God placed Esther in the palace as part of his plan. Now, going back to what I just said earlier, how she got there, right? You hear that? Wait. Didn't Esther go to the palace because she made some immoral choices? Yes, you are correct in thinking that. But listen, what you will come to realize as you read the book of Esther is that the book of Esther doesn't dwell on how she got there, but the fact that she's there now. Somewhere along the way, Esther does become a godly woman. Doesn't tell us when or how. Perhaps she got to the palace and started to realize it wasn't what she thought it was going to be. Maybe she started to long something more, to a desire to return to the faith that she knew. Perhaps it was through the situation where her life is in danger. Because oftentimes, tragedy makes you reflect on what's important in life and what you're living for, yeah? We don't know. But what we do know, what we do see in Esther chapter 4, we see her recognizing God's purposes in her life and putting God's agenda above everything else. Esther's life hinged on her realizing that she had been sovereignly placed somewhere with a role to play in God's purposes. Why is that important to know, especially when it talks about being on mission? Listen, family, you are at a place in life by God's sovereign design, and you have a role to play in God's purposes for God's mission. Just as simple as that. Now let me encourage you here with this, okay? Maybe you don't feel like you could be useful to God because, like Esther, your past is filled with mistakes. Now, what I'm not trying to do here in this moment is simply just brush past them or say that they weren't really mistakes at all. Just that when you awaken to God's purposes in your life, you need to realize he's not dwelling on those things in the past. Because here's the things in the past, they can't change. But you have an opportunity now to focus on how he works in and through you in the present. Listen, part of God's redemption in your life, taking you where you are right now and using you from that point on, listen, you need to get his forgiveness for what you've done. There's no mistake in that at all. You need to make restitution where you can. But you need to do that and then by God's grace, move forward. Because there's work to be done. God is our hope for the future. Listen, not condemnation for the past. He is drawing us into him. If I can say it a different way, God is not only the God of the cross who forgives your past, he is the God of the resurrection that remakes your future. Family, he's calling us forward. And here's what's so wild. This is so wild to me about the mystery of God's grace and redemption is that not only does God forgive your past, he can take your mistakes and even reweave even your mistakes for his good plan. Bananas to me. The mystery of God's grace is that he takes even our mistakes and somehow brings about blessing in his plan. We need to hear that because many of us in here came in here today with a lot of mistakes, a lot of regrets, a lot of shame, a lot of brokenness. Some of you have brokenness in your life, scandalous relationships, drugs in your past, broken marriages, broken relationships, terrible mistakes. Listen to me, loved one. God will take even those things and still use them for his plan. Rest in that. Some of you are going to be able to minister to people who's going through the mess that you used to go through. Get forgiveness for what you did in the past, and then get on with what God is calling you to do in the future. Now, here's the thing. Maybe your past includes a lot of pain inflicted to you by someone else. I want to be really sensitive here, okay? I never want to just simply brush past what took place in your life that may have caused hurt or trauma, wherever the case may be, okay? I don't want to do that. What I do want you to see is that God is able to take even your pain and still use that for his plan too. Paul talks about his suffering in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4. He says this, that we are now able to comfort others with the comfort whether we have been comforted. Paul essentially is saying God's whole point in my suffering was letting me experience a part of him, his comfort, so that I can then step in and share that with you in your pain. Listen, again, I want to say this and not sound insensitive here, and hopefully this sets some of you guys free. Some of you really need to get out of this victim mentality. I like him. I like you. This is your first time, isn't it? Not here, but praise God. Some of us need to get out of this victim mentality because it's killing your present. It's keeping you from moving forward where God is trying to use you significantly for the kingdom. Victimhood implies powerlessness. We are not powerlessness in Christ. We are not. We have a redeeming God who sovereignly can recreate all things for good. And there's nothing more powerful than that. The point is what I'm trying to get at. Don't obsess over what you can't change. God has a plan having you here at this moment, so get after it. Again, you want to know what's so interesting in this story? God's not mentioned at all. When you go through Esther, you never see God's name. It's really interesting. In fact, in a lot of Esther, it seems like God is really absent. But for us as the reader looking into this, you can't help but see God's hand all throughout it. You can't help but see how he's moving. He's been weaving a plan. And family, if that's true here, guess what? That's true where you are as well. He's doing something, which leads me to this. Esther's influence was in the palace, not the temple. Okay? Esther's influence was in the palace, not the temple. What do I mean by that? She's not in ministry. What am I getting at here? There's a book titled A Theology as Big as a City. It lists out three main characters that are used by God in the return from the exile. The three characters, Ezra. Ezra is a guy who teaches the law. He taught people God's word and God's ways. And then you have Nehemiah, who's essentially like an urban developer. He rebuilt the city of Jerusalem. And then you have Esther, who is a queen who worked in the secular courts for justice. What you see is God used three different kinds of people to bring about the restoration of his people. The point, the heart of this church is not having you all quit your jobs and simply go into ministry, or even making you think that your ministry happens here by being a servant leader. Now, it's important to be a servant leader. Don't think just because I said that you're like, oh, Pastor Derrick said I don't need to serve. False. I ain't say that. Because what typically happens is oftentimes when we're serving the church, it helps us discover how to leverage our position in the kingdom of God. So if you ain't serving, that's your pitch, okay? Listen to me. God placed many of you in the palace. You are in a position right now, or you have the capacity to be at a spot where other people can't make it. And I need you to hear me say this. That's a good thing. That's a great thing. We need Christians in places of influence. College students, this is what you're training for. God uses Christians in business and government and medicine and art and all these different things. Whatever your trade is, you are in that position for a reason, which then leads me to this. Esther leveraged her position in the palace for God's kingdom, not for self-promotion. What do I mean by that? Esther faced the most fundamental decision of her life. Am I going to use this position to protect myself, or am I going to use this position to leverage myself in such a way for the kingdom of God, even if it costs me everything? Here's a question for you to consider this morning. What do you want from being in the palace? What do you want from being in the position that you're in? Is it for you personally, or is it for the kingdom of God? Or those of you already in a job, how are you using that position for the kingdom now? This is one of the most fundamental questions of discipleship. Whose kingdom are you actually living for? Have you ever become a disciple? Stop and think about it. Esther's objection to Mordecai in verse 11, right? She says, if I risk the palace, I might lose everything. And Mordecai's response to her in verse 13, yes, Esther, that's true. But if you don't risk the palace, you will lose everything. He says, you're already going to die. You'll be dead. That sounds a lot like Jesus' words to us. He who loves his life will lose it, but he who hates his life in this world will gain eternal life. So similar. And you may say, well, I want to live for God's kingdom, but what does that look like for me? I don't know of any underhanded murder plots that I can step into. So what do I do? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's ask the question, how do I leverage my place in the palace for God's kingdom? Well, let's start with the obvious, family. Share Christ with people in your palace. Pretty straightforward, right? In a sense, the palace each of you live in is where you live, work, and play. No one can live out and explain the gospel in the context that you're in like you can. You have rapport and relationships with people that other people in this room do not have. It would be, listen, I would love to follow you around to work one day with my Bible and go through the Romans road with your coworker. And you're laughing because you're like, bro, that's weird. Yes, it is. So if it's weird for me to do it, shouldn't you step into that position? Share Christ with your coworkers, with the people in the palace. What does that look like? Are you retired? You're a teacher? You're an office worker? You have a trade? What is your palace? A friend of mine said this a long time ago. He was talking to students. He said, you may be the only spirit-filled person in that palace who can share Jesus. What a perspective. Can we be real? Yes, we can be. Some of us are afraid to say anything because of what others might think about what we believe. And to take it a step further, we're scared of how it would affect our jobs. That's real. Again, this is what I do for work, so I can talk about it all the time, right? So I don't want to just like kind of brush over it like as if that's not like a real concern. But if I could take this a step further, what would it look like to be smart about it, but at the same time take a risk? To take a risk for the sake of the kingdom. You know, I mentioned the book of Acts earlier, but did you know that in the book of Acts, 37 of the 40 miracles were performed outside of the church? I remember saying that when we were going through the Acts series. Hopefully you remember. I know you guys like just hold on to everything I say. So I know you remember that. But over the last 2 years, what I've been praying specifically for myself and for the church here is Ephesians 4. I've been praying that over us. That we here as leaders would equip the saints for the work of ministry. That's my job here. That is why you guys say, hey, this guy is the guy. To equip you for the work of ministry. For the sake of context here, I play the role of Mordecai, and you're Esther. I'm telling you to take a risk. So if that's true, then what does that mean? How do I continue to leverage? Well, you can leverage your skill to bring salvation to places where God's not known. This does not mean that you simply just write checks to people who are willing to go. I need you to hear me say this. Every weekend when we end out our service, what do we say? Go and what? Proclaim. Why? Because we are all sent to do the work. Listen, the counselors might be willing to go to Ireland, right? Praise God for them. Peter and his family were willing to go to KL. Alan and his family were willing to go to Nairobi. The list goes on and on and on. What I'm getting at is, yes, we send these people, but in the meantime, guess what? You are sent as well. God has you here for a reason. The gospel has always gone forward on the wings of business. Paul wanted to be the first one to take the gospel to Rome. But when he got there in Acts 28, you guys remember? Who did he meet? Christians. He met people that were there, soldiers, businessmen, and businesswomen. And he's like, yo, I'm going to hitch my wagon to you. You guys are here already. You can get a comfortable position here, or you could use your talents to get a job somewhere else. That's why we put up church planners, right? We didn't get a chance to put up our church planner this year because of the snow. We're going to try to figure out how to get him back here. But that's why we put these individuals forward. Because maybe God might be calling you strategically to go somewhere else, to start another work, to see people who don't know Jesus come to know Jesus. People who are willing to say, hey, here I am, I'll go. Now, I know I just took a subtle shot about giving money, but the third thing you can do is actually give away money, okay? That's how you can leverage. Let's be real, right? Practically, some of us need to live on much, much less. I will. Listen, you can make tons of money, but you can also give it away. So here's a question for you. Your lifestyle, does it show that life is for you, or is it for the kingdom? Have you been willing to take up your cross? Paul said in 2 Corinthians that God increases our seed for sowing, not to increase standard of living, but a standard of giving. And then finally, we can volunteer in our community. There's tons of projects that we do. This is why we do Serve 615 every year, to introduce everyone to different ways that they can get involved outside of the walls of the church. I know many of you guys are doing things with Project Connect and Urban Promise, and I know some have done some extra things up at Glenview Elementary, right? Praise God for that. And I know those are just the ones that I mentioned. I know I'm not saying that you guys aren't doing anything else, but if you are, praise God. What we want you to do is leverage your palace to step into the mission that God has for you. When you do that, God's going to use you for his glory and his purposes, which leads me to this. Esther became great giving up the palace. Did you know 13 of the 14 times that she's called queen in this book is after the situation that takes place in chapter 4? I love that. In other words, it was this moment in Esther's life that made her truly a queen. What the writer is trying to show us is that she became a great person not by trying to become a great person, but by yielding her talents and her position for other people. Greatness in God's kingdom is never found by trying to become great, but by offering up our lives for others. Now, I need to tell you, you may not have a book in the Bible named after you, right? Shout out to Esther here. But you will have an eternal reward in the form of people in heaven whose lives were saved because you allowed yourself to be used by God. This is where my tissues come in. Someone sent me a picture the Sunday before my grandmother's funeral, sitting in the back of all of you guys. And they said, this is your grandmother's legacy. You never know what God is going to do in your faithfulness. You never know. Are you being obedient to what he's calling you into? Like Esther, you are in a place sovereignly for his glory. And who knows what he can do with it. Now, I don't want to end this message leading you astray, right? So, I don't want to be like, oh, just be like Esther, okay? Because again, her example, it gets better, but it ain't start great. But how do we look at her life and try to move forward in it? How do we develop the ability to give up our lives for others in the same way? Listen, I want to wrap it up by saying this. Esther is not an example. She's a signpost. We see all these characters in Scripture as examples, but family, each one of them are pointing to someone greater. Listen, in many ways, Esther is not an example at all. Seeing her as an example might inspire us, but it can't empower us to live on mission. It can't. If all you do is look at these Bible characters as examples, listen, you are going to be discouraged because they super messy. Esther is here to point us to Jesus. How can I say that? Jesus was the real Esther. Jesus lived in the ultimate palace and had the ultimate glory, but he left it, turned his back on it so that he could save you and I. And unlike Esther, nobody had to pressure him to do it. Philippians 2 said that he emptied himself and identified with us by taking on the form of a servant and then suffered and died in our place, in our condemnation. He didn't simply do this at the risk of his life like Esther, but at the cost of it. And family, now he stands not before the throne of Xerxes, but the throne of the universe and uses the good favor he has obtained to bless us and to protect us. And when we see that image and we rest on that image, it empowers us to move forward because of what he's done for us. Because he did all that work for us, we're forgiven for all the ways we don't measure up to the standards. And when you see that Jesus gave up his life, family, when you embrace that, when you accept that, when you realize that you don't measure up, by looking into what you'll develop the ability to give up your life ultimately for others. We have a deep need to turn Bible characters into heroes because we still suppose the point of the Bible is to make us act better, but that's not the case at all. It is to point us to Jesus, who can truly change our lives. None of the Bible characters are there to point you to themselves. They're all there to point you to Jesus. And that is what Esther is doing here. And here's the thing, when we know Jesus, it truly brings about change. So what's the conclusion in this? Don't put the cart before the horse. Living for Jesus comes only after being rescued by Jesus. Because when you're rescued by Jesus, that is when you can actually be on mission on purpose. And he puts you there on purpose. But here's what I want to do now in this moment. I want you to think about the place where the Lord has you. Truly think about your palace. I'm looking out the room, and there's a plethora of positions out here. Many of you guys, week in and week out, let's be real, sometimes it's a grind to go to work. It's frustrating because you got to deal with messy coworkers. And if you don't got a messy coworker, you might be the messy coworker. So people got to deal with you. But in the midst of that, can we be open-handed and say, God, this is the palace that you've placed me in? Who are the people that I'm called to for your glory to step out to see saved? It may not be a nation, but it may be someone. Father, who is that person, and show them to me for your glory. And when you show them to me, give me the strength through the power of your Holy Spirit to be open-handed, to speak with them, to talk with them, to not be scared, to take a risk for your glory or for the kingdom. And in some way, shape, or form, maybe I just prayed that whole prayer for you, but in some way, shape, or form, maybe that's what we need to be doing this week, is asking the Lord to use us in that way. And family, I think we would all be blown away by what God does with that prayer. Let's pray to that end. Father, we thank you for who you are. We thank you that we have a chance to open up your word and see that we have an opportunity to be on mission, on purpose, that you didn't just save us to be bumps on a log. You put us in these places after you saved us to be used for you and for your glory. Help us to be faithful to that through the power of your Holy Spirit. God, be with us. We love you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. Our prayer team is coming forward. If there's anything that we could be praying for you about, we'd love the opportunity to do that. As they're coming, why don't you stand to your feet? A couple things. This Friday, Lent begins. What did I say? Friday? My bad. Wednesday. Thank you. Wednesday, Lent begins. I'm going to be sending out an email. I'm really excited about this. We created essentially like a prayer guide that we're going to give out, that we're going to send out to you every day. And it's not just written by me and other pastors, it's written by others in the church, which that's the part that I'm really excited about, is to have you guys be led and ministered to by others in the body. And so with Lent, we're going to be taking some time to fast and pray. We're going to give you like some prompts, what that looks like, all of that. So be on the lookout for that, okay? And I didn't speak to Rev Kev about this yet because I just jumped back on the ship. But my hope is that some of these weeks during Lent, that we'll actually be able to open up the building throughout the workday for prayer and things like that. So be on the lookout for that. I got to talk to the boss first, okay? So if there's, like I said, if there's anything we'd be praying for you about, we would love the opportunity to do that. But family, as you go out of here, go out knowing that you are in the places that you're supposed to be on purpose for the mission of God. Family, we love you. Go and proclaim. We'll see you next week.